My name is Stefan Laxness. I'm an architectural researcher and artist, and I'm doing my residency here at LABoral in the context of the European Media Art Platform, EMAP. My project is titled Learning from the Commons, a Keystone for a Rewilded Future. The project is concerned with the possibility of a participatory project for environmental restoration throughout Europe. More specifically, the project sort of, seeks to learn from different models of territorial occupation, such as the Montes Vecinales in Galicia, as a potential framework to be replicated and to be learned from elsewhere in Europe for local community-led environmental restoration. In terms of the tools I was using during my investigation, I was very interested in exploring and experimenting with open source environmental sensing technology. And so I rigged modified or DIY modified cameras that are capable of expressing values of photosynthesis in plants to a very simple helium balloon as a way to map and record aerial footage. I started off by looking at this term of rewilding, which essentially means passively managing large pieces of land through the reintroduction of keystone species and apex predators, so large animals. And this is a term that has gained popularity in the last 20, 30 years. And it sort of stands in opposition to conservationism, which is about conserving a state. This proposes that we should, create new states. But the term rewilding is very broad. But the two reasons why rewilding is gaining in popularity in Europe is that large parts of Europe have a huge problem or a future problem with land abandonment and rural depopulation. And it is those two processes that some believe will be the trigger for sort of rewilding as a strategy for restoring large parts of the European territory, environmental restoration. But as an architect or as a spatial researcher, I started to ask myself the question of how could a project of environmental restoration become a participatory project. The reason why I was asking myself that question is because the plan for a rewilding project seemed to also be neutral to the reasons why these areas were depopulated or abandoned in the first place, so neutral to the reasons for the marginalizations of these areas. If in the future there are plans to restore environmentally large parts of Europe, a lot of that will happen in these marginalized areas specifically. And so then it becomes important to address how these restoration projects will take place and to what extent they will be inclusive of sort of local and indigenous communities that are already there and that are already marginalized. For my project, I undertook two field trips with two specific goals. The first field trip in Zamora and Salamanca, and sort of by the Portuguese border, was specifically to go and survey and register the condition of depopulation and agricultural land abandonment, as those are two areas that are undergoing those processes quite rapidly. The second trip was to a small village in Galicia called Froxan. And the reason why Froxan is interesting is because Froxan is what's called a Montes Vecinales and Mano Común. So it is a small community that has stewardship over roughly 1 square kilometer of communal forests. Froxan as a community a few years ago took a collective decision to restore their communal forest in order to diversify it sort of economically, but also to diversify it ecologically as a way of being resilient both economically and environmentally in the future. One of the main reasons was also to protect themselves from forest fires. And Froxan was interesting because as an indigenous community, they were choosing to, in a sense, rewild their own little piece of territory. Froxan as a community chose to restore their forests collectively and in a participatory manner as a way to obviously restore their ecosystem and guarantee that they will be resilient to drought and forest fires in the future, but also for an economic pretext, which is to guarantee that it produces different sort of sources of income. But Froxan, in a sense, is not an island, right? It is a village that exists amongst 3,000 other villages that all manage their communal forest in different ways. And so as a network, they start to actually form sort of a territory that actively transforms the Galicia as a region. And so the speculation very quickly becomes, what are the parameters that need to be encouraged in order to allow a community like Froxan to thrive, and how can sort of some of their community-based models and frameworks and structures and of how they organize be transferred to other places where potentially that sort of format of occupation doesn't already exist. So for the exhibition, I wanted to produce a piece that contextualizes and communicates the ongoing research that I started at LABoral. And it's a projection, a sort of animated atlas of information. One of the medias that features prominently is a series of NDVI sort of recordings done with a balloon and some modified cameras, where the balloon is filming walks that I took during my field trip. So first through sort of abandoned lands in Zamora, and second registering a collective action on the communal forest in Galicia. And in parallel to that, I wanted to share sort of additional information or sort of samples of information that I'd collected during my field trip. So whether it's sort of images of specific conditions, or in the case of Galicia, sort of a documentation of a eucalyptus brigade of volunteers clearing a forest in order to later replant native trees. The mixture of sort of documentation, images and videos along with interviews are structured in such a way to communicate sort of the condition, the general condition of sort of the Montes Vecinales, and also what is at stake in what they're doing in the context of the project to the viewer.